Welcome friends. Tales of Herding Gods Episode 77 Explanation. Without any delayed start our explanation. Qin Mu stood on the majestic moonship with his hands stretched out to hold the pillars. He was like a giant getting punished as he looked at the world that had appeared in front of him. Behind him, the broken moon floated in the sky while meteors fell down from time to time. As they crashed around the moonship, the incomparably black darkness was lighted up. Behind the light, the devils were in a disorder. They were bustling with activity and making a commotion. In front of the ship, however, was a pure land that had never been invaded by the darkness. It was cut off from the rest of the world, tranquil, mysterious, and filled with the unknown. It was hard to imagine that there was such a serene place in great ruins. In front of Qin Mu were a vast forest and an endless mountain range. However, at a place farther away, the ground was suddenly cut off as if it was emptied out by someone. With the sea and clouds separating them, there was a city that stood tall and upright in mid-air. It was like the place where immortals lived. The sky was filled with golden clouds and light, while below palaces towered into the cloudy heaven. Floating high up in the clouds was an unbroken chain of mountain peaks which revealed their bright golden peaks. In the depths of the clouds, majestic god statues stood like an emperor protecting his territories. A huge machinery floated 3,000 yards away from the sky, operating quietly. Countless formations were imprinted into the mysterious iron and gold structure, forming an incomparably complicated large-scale machine. Energy produced by it materialized into trails of flowing light which connected the city and the sky. However, everything was already destroyed. Qin Mu was stunned. In front of him was a ruined carefree village. The one dazzling sky city was now a ruin. The palaces that towered into the clouds were riddled with holes and the unbroken chain of peaks that was floating in the sky had been smashed and shattered. Broken rocks of all shapes and sizes floated in the sea of clouds while majestic god statues stood slanted, missing limbs here and there. In the middle of the sun in the sky was a huge black dot which had already swallowed more than half of the sun. Only the golden halo around it remained, looking like a golden hoop. The city above the clouds had been destroyed, and the great machinery that stood upright in the sky was broken as well. Its shattered components floated quietly around. Only a couple huge pieces of machinery remained operating, maintaining the barrier of Carefree Village. Not far from the moonship, there was a horizontally inscribed board stabbed diagonally into the forest. On that toppled overly large inscribed stele, 2 words were written. They said Xiao Pal. The horizontally inscribed board was broken. A pang of sorrow suddenly surged through Qin Mu, and it grew frantically until it filled his whole heart. There was no carefree village in this world anymore. There was no place to be carefree anymore. This giant who was standing on the moonship and holding the pillars seemed to be bearing the punishment of heaven as he lowered his head. He knelt down, and tears dripped droplet by droplet onto the solid floor. The home that he longed for had already been destroyed, and nothing remained of it anymore. He had looked for such a long time, fantasized about his home in his dreams, his family, neighbors, and friends, but all of them had suddenly been shattered with the appearance of this world in front of him. It was like a drawing done on the sand, vanishing with the gust of a wind. There was no longer any home, any mother waiting for her son, any stern father. All of the things he had fantasized about were no longer there. He awoke from his dream. He was still the orphan adopted by the numerous old, weak, sick, and elderly people. His hometown was gone. Dutian Devil King raised his head and looked out the window to see the giant kneeling among the pillars. The giant that was shrouded in the hazy moonlight had his face facing downwards so only the shaking of his shoulders could be seen. At this moment, Dutian Devil King could well imagine the youth's pain. When his Dutian world was annihilated, he had felt the same sorrow. He was inconsolable and couldn't suppress his emotions. While he was bawling, he blamed the world, and with his overflowing anger, he had fought with the messengers of death from Yudu, trying to save the lives of his clansmen. He was struck down countless times, and his body was broken along with his soul. Then, he had finally submitted himself to fate. In Qin Mu, he saw himself the past, the him when he was young, the him that was about to be struck down and submit to fate. When life is weak and one's direction is lost, coming and going like a lunatic. When playing in the mud, it's hard to know the luminosity of a pearl. How many trials and how many hardships, how much obliteration must one suffer to temporarily return back to fear? Where is home? Where is my home? Qin Mu gradually raised his head up with a cold gaze. His eyes were like the bright luster given off by the moon. When he closed his eyes, that light vanished, but when he reopened them, they were like two bright moons. As he stood on the moonship, his emotions rose and fell as myriads of thoughts went through his mind. He was unable to calm down for a long time. I didn't come here to find Carefree Village, but to search for village chief, granny, and the rest. They are my kin, and disabled elderly village is my hometown. It's the carefree village of my heart. Qin Mu composed himself and looked around. Suddenly, he saw a couple of stone statues placed at the border of the barrier. Even existences of the god realm would find it hard to travel through the darkness of great ruins unless they were carrying god statues. However, god statues were extremely dense, and even existences of cult master level would find it hard to carry them. They would be unable to travel far with them. The stone statues at the edge should have been transported here using great magical power to force the darkness back. After entering Carefree Village, these stone statues were no longer useful and was thus left behind. Qin Mu's heart stirred. Village chief could have brought apothecary to walk in the darkness and deal with all kinds of strange peculiarities, while Mute should have a method of his own to deal with the darkness. As for Old Ma, Cripple, Butcher, and Blind, they would have needed the stone statues to be able to move in the darkness. Old Ma, Cripple, and Butcher's body had already recovered, so they could walk a longer distance while carrying a god statue. No one knew the extent of Def's abilities, but not even ghosts and gods dared doubt the greatness of his painting skills. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was his hardcore admirer who took honor in collecting his paintings. While what concerned Granny, the previous cult master Li Tianxing was hidden in her body, so she should be able to carry the god statue as well. These statues here should have been left behind by the villagers. In that case, they must have found their way here. Could it be that they entered this place and got trapped, which is why they couldn't return to the village for New Year's? Qin Mu opened his eyes and looked around. Vigorous energy poured into his eyes, and he executed the 9 Heavens Eye awakening skill that Blind had taught him to its maximum. I'm here. Village chief, Granny, I'm going to bring you guys back for New Year's. He didn't step into Carefree Village straight away but first checked it out from outside. Village chief and the rest were extremely strong, so if they had really entered Carefree Village, it wouldn't look as serene as it was now. There must be no lack of danger inside, because of which they got trapped. Even the moonship couldn't guarantee Qin Mu's safety. His gaze landed on the forest in front of Carefree Village and saw the traces that village chief and the rest had left. The divine arts of great practitioners like village chief and Mute would cause astonishing damage to the surroundings. However, this wasn't the case by the forest. Although there were traces of a battle there, the damage wasn't extensive. Qin Mu's gaze followed the traces and saw a few ruins in the forest. The path that village chief and the rest had taken went along them. The reason why the path was along these ruins was that this was the only path, the only safe way to enter Carefree Village. Other than this path, every other place was restricted. Qin Mu looked with 9 Heavens divine eyes and saw faint rays of light which were extremely treacherous in the forest. However, he couldn't see what the restrictions were. These restrictions were extremely dangerous, so the path along the ruins was much safer in comparison. Qin Mu continued to stare fixedly forward. At this moment, he saw a few strands of fine light bursting forth from a ruin which was about 300 miles away from him, but not far from the end of the forest. Qin Mu's vital qi burst forth, and he plucked down the jade pendant from the barrier. Activating Moonship, he took a stride forward and entered the barrier. HNNN. A gentle tremor came over him, and he felt like he had crossed into another world. The darkness which shrouded great ruins instantly vanished behind him, and when he turned his head to look behind, he could see nothing. At this moment, he suddenly heard weird laughter. Countless devils that had been hugging the body of Moonship leaped off the ship and surged into the forest like a flood. A devil god that had 2 heads and 5 tails rose into the air. She also had 8 long legs which had palms instead of feet, which she used to scurry through the air while shouting sternly, "Vada, Sanskrit, kill." Dutian Devil King jumped in shock. He totally didn't expect that there would be so many devils secretly hiding on the ship in the cover of darkness. The devil god turned her head back and chuckled at Qin Mu, who was on the ship. "Fancy finding by sheer luck what one has been searched for far and wide. We had wanted to enter Carefree Village for quite a long time, so we must thank you for leading us here." This devil god was none other than that one Qin Mu and village chief had met in the living realm of the dead. It was also this devil god who had lured Qin Mu out into the darkness after he had met the sun ship in Border Dragon City to kidnap him. It was evident that this devil god had long ago hidden herself on the moonship to wait for a chance. She seemed to have known that Qin Mu would definitely return to the living realm of the dead one day and borrow the moonship to return to Carefree Village. And now, she had finally succeeded. "My children, take over the last of the Pure Land. From today onwards, this world shall be ours," that devil god cried out and brought the omnipresent devils to surge towards the other end of the forest. Qin Mu was expressionless as he gazed at these heavenly devils. Suddenly, a cryptic pulse came from the forest and the flesh and bones of the tens of thousands heavenly devils that had surged forward melted away. Only their skin was left, but when the gust of wind blew past, even it turned into ashes and scattered away. The devil god who had rushed into the sky above the forest instantly rushed out. "Sa Parami." A huge whirlpool appeared and sucked her in. Qin Mu had seen this method before. When fighting against the village chief, that devil god had created the space leading to the other shore and pulled village chief into it, trying to trap him there. Never had she then expect to fall inside it as well. Now she had executed this method not to trap anyone, but to avoid the danger in the forest by hiding in the other shore. Right then, a ball of fire rose from the forest, and a beam shot out from it into the depths of the space. In the sky, a trail of fresh blood flowed out, and the corpse of that devil god appeared fell down. Once it crashed into the forest, the corpse turned into ashes. On the moonship, Dutian Devil King was quiet out of fear, his blood running cold. This goddamn world, can it not be so treacherous? The pure white moonlight in Qin Mu's eyes drifted like mist, and a booming voice sounded out as he muttered to himself, "Your deaths have affirmed my guess. This restricted area is not to defend against any invasion of enemies, but to prevent people of Carefree Village from walking out. It was left behind by the existence that destroyed great ruins." Dutian Devil King heard what Qin Mu said and was slightly stunned, then instantly understood what he was saying. This restricted area in the forest was not to defend against the invasion of enemies, but to prevent people of Carefree Village from walking out. If it was to defend against outside enemies, then only people who barged in would be attacked by the restricted area. Whereas here, no matter if people were trying to go in or to come out, they would all receive ruthless obliteration. The ruins to the side should be the path that the people of Carefree Village had opened up by force to escape Carefree Village and not a path that had formed naturally. To understand the situation from the slightest clue, ordinary people would have never noticed this. The ones who taught this brat are definitely absolute villains that are incomparably cunning. Dutian Devil King shuddered uncontrollably. It was obvious that the heavenly devils that had clung to the ship hadn't escaped Qin Mu's detection. The reason he didn't reveal his knowledge was to have them test the path. Such a ruthless and sinister youth would definitely have absolute villains for his teachers. Dutian Devil King sized up the restricted area and thought to himself, "With just the moonship, we can't enter this place. Moonship is too huge, and if we barged in, we would definitely trigger the restricted area. If it was so simple for the restricted area to obliterate that female devil god, destroying the moonship shouldn't be too troublesome either." Just as he thought this, the moonship suddenly trembled and gradually squatted down. A huge tremor shook the enormous three-legged ship as it lay down on the floor and stopped moving. Dutian Devil King immediately felt the heavenly god aura around Qin Mu gave disappear, and he let out a sigh of relief. If Qin Mu had driven the moonship into the restricted area, even he would have been destroyed. Even though Qin Mu had seen the destruction of Carefree Village, he still possessed his rationality, which astonished Dutian Devil King. He then kicked the dragon Qilin awake. The dragon Qilin shook his head and followed behind him while asking in a low and muffled voice, Iron lump, where are we? Dutian Devil King became furious. You slept all the way and still have the face to ask me? The dragon Qin smiled. You also don't know where we are. Apparently, you have also slept all the way. At the center of the huge pillars, Qin Mu's body returned back to normal, and he pulled back his legs that had sunk into the ship. The body of the ship had fused with his legs, but since Qin Mu's body had grown extremely gigantic earlier, he had left huge footprints after he had shrunk in size. This allowed him to pull out his legs. Qin Mu stood up, and his mind immediately trembled. He was incomparably weak at that moment, and the divine treasures that had been opened up by the huge amount of energy from the moonship closed one after another. Only spirit embryo and 5 elements divine treasures did not leave him. The ship's energy was too great for the current him, so if he wanted to control it, he had to exhaust his life force as a price. Yang Jingjing has always lived on the sun ship, so she had exhausted way more life force than me. It's been really hard on her. Qin Mu took in 2 deep breaths and consumed some spirit pills to supplement his body. He rose then and said, Devil King, Fatty Dragon, let's enter this restricted area. Dutian Devil King let out a shaky breath and said, You're planning to use my knowledge and vision to avoid the dangers and find the villains of your village? Qin Mu nodded. You are the Devil King of Dutian World, the King of Devil Gods. Your knowledge and vision are much greater than mine, so only you can bring me in. Dutian Devil King laughed out loud and said proudly, That's right, only I can bring you in and out safely, you can lick my feet. Qin Mu's expression changed slightly, and Dutian Devil King immediately changed his words as he laughed. I'm joking, look at you. I can bring you in and out, but you must release me as you promised. You agreed to it. Qin Mu smiled. Don't worry, I will definitely not eat my words. I can sign the Pact of Earth Count with you. Dutian Devil King shook his head. No need for that. If we sign the Pact of Earth Count, I won't believe you anymore. You will definitely dig a hole for me to jump into. Qin Mu laughed coarsely and thought to himself, Dutian Devil King really knows me well. With just a verbal promise, I find it embarrassing to trick him. Grandpa Cripple is right, I'm still too kind. He jumped onto the dragon Chilin's back and Dutian Devil King also got on. Fire clouds grew under the dragon Chilin's feet, and they slowly descended onto the ground. Soon, they reached the edge of the restricted area. Dutian Devil King was extremely nervous and spat out a few gears from his mouth. Even though there's a safe path here, this safe path was established from inside. If we follow it to walk out, there won't be much danger, but if we use it to walk in, we'll face quite some danger. You must keep close to me and not take the wrong path. If you trigger the restricted area, we'll all die. Qin Mu immediately moved forward and opened up the god statue's chest to adjust the gears there. Adding a few more spare parts, he reminded, Devil King, don't try to play any tricks or you will be trapped as well. Dutian Devil King replied in a bad mood, Don't worry, I understand. Stick close. Qin Mu followed after him, and the 4 faces and 12 eyes of Dutian Devil King looked around. His 4 mouths muttered as he saw through the dangers in the restricted area and did his calculations. Qin Mu even saw Dutian Devil King using his devil chi to execute methods of space calculation. Countless numbers and runes moved in the air as he did incomparably complicated calculations. Devil King, your attainments in algebra are extremely high, Qin Mu said in astonishment. Dutian Devil King replied in a bad mood, You don't say. If you don't learn your algebra properly, you will only know the form of most of the divine arts but not their essence. Can you teach me? Qin Mu asked with excitement. I have a canon of supreme mystery which I still have yet to study thoroughly. Canon of supreme mystery uses the divinatory symbols of the 8 divinatory trigrams to represent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's an octal number system which is quite thorny. Dutian Devil King said in astonishment, Octal number system? You will have to use the 8 trigrams to calculate, which are heaven, earth, thunder, water, mountain, wind, flame, and lake. If you used numbers to replace them, it would be quite troublesome to calculate, but if you used the 8 trigrams as an abacus to operate the transformation, that would be much easier. We'll talk later, don't talk to me now. If I calculate wrongly, we are all finish. Qin Devil King's attainments in algebra weren't extremely high, but simply too profound to understand for normal people. A sentence he had said without thinking gave Qin Mu the feeling of having been enlightened. He had been studying the canon of supreme mystery these days, but he didn't achieve much. It was too profound and calculating it was incomparably troublesome. However, if he used the 8 trigrams as an abacus, it would become an exquisite tool for calculation. All the problems that he had faced could easily be solved. There's not only the octal number system from the 8 divinatory trigrams. There is also yin and yang binary, 4 phases quaternary system. Qin Mu managed to deduce many things from one answer. There were many mathematical physics in canon of supreme mystery, but there were no tools of calculation listed there. After getting advice from Qin Devil King, he finally had a chance to actually comprehend the canon of supreme mystery completely. If I wanted to do that, I would need to have a formation for calculation, the 8 trigrams of Taiji. Qin Mu took out the canon of supreme mystery and browsed through it. His vital qi transformed into the 4 phases of yin and yang before forming the runes of the 8 divinatory trigrams which floated in front of him. With a pull of his hand, the 8 trigrams of Taiji split into 49 copies. The yin and yang revolved, the 4 phases operated, and the 8 divinatory trigrams transformed. So that's how the Dayan calculation in canon of supreme mystery works. Qin Mu looked at the transformation diagram and muttered as numbers formed in his mind. "Don't be distracted," the back face of Qin Devil King scolded him. Qin Mu immediately dispersed the 8 trigrams. With Qin Devil King leading the way, he considered himself safe. Qin Devil King was the ruler of Qin world, after all, so his knowledge and vision far surpassed that of Qin Mu. Even though he didn't have the ability to break the restrictions in this restricted area, avoiding them were not difficult for him. In addition, the restrictions along the path had already been broken by people from the inside. Village chief and the rest had also broken the restrictions by force, so the journey was relatively safe. In no time, they came to the first ruins and Qin Mu stopped. This place was a village with only 4 households. The pots, bowls, and stoves were all still here, but no one lived here anymore. Qin Mu saw 11 graves, but there was no tombstone erected. The yellow dirt grave was big, but he saw no clue who was buried inside. "This place is safe," Qin Devil King said. Qin Mu walked into the village and looked around. Suddenly, his heart trembled when he saw a cradle in one of the households. There was also a wooden horse and a few infants' clothing on the bed which looked very delicate. On the chest of one of the pieces of clothing was a word Qin sewed on. Qin Mu took out the jade pendant which also had the word Qin on it. The youth closed his eyes for a long time. There were no tears in his eyes when he opened them, as they were long dried up. "Is this my home?" He walked past the kitchen stove and looked at the pots hanging above it, the bowls covered on the table. He wanted to find more items, to obtain more information, but there were no more clues. He came to the door and suddenly froze. He stood there silently. There was a 11 word pasted on the door. Even though there was no wind and rain here, the passage of time had faded the handwriting. This 11 word meant that the owners of this house had married. They had married right in this restricted area. The small wooden horse in this courtyard must have been prepared for the unborn child by the owner of this house. The delicate clothing should have been tailored for that child as well. "It's time to go," Qin Devil King hurried him. "Once this is done, I'll be returning. I don't want to stay another day in your goddamn world." Qin Mu sorted out his emotions and continued to head deeper into the restricted area with him. 4 hours later, they came to another ruin. This was a small town with about 100 households. Outside the ruin, there were rows and rows of graves. Qin Mu walked around and saw that there was a school in the town, so there should have been youths learning knowledge here. Once upon a time, this should have been a bustling place where people came and went. Even there was the incomparably treacherous restricted area just outside, this place should have been brimming with life. Yet in the next village, only 4 households were left. They continued to venture forward, and the third ruin was a city. Huge pieces of shattered spirit weapons were scattered all over the ground here. If these were sold in Eternal Peace Empire, one would definitely become the richest person in the world, but here they just lay all around. Let's continue, Qin Mu said solemnly. We're so dead. Granny Sai's angry voice came from the distance. You old geezers, you even got this old woman fall for it and die alongside you. At the end of the forest, Blind's expression became solemn. He propped himself on his cane to rest while Butcher swung his knives. Around them was a layered space that kept changing in a peculiar way. This space was layered, and every time it changed, the scenery would transform as well. Sometimes it was a vast forest, and sometimes it was a blistering hot desert. Sometimes it was waves overflowing to the sky, and sometimes it was stars from space flying into their faces. Every time it changed, a different restricted law would burst forth. When the power of the divine restrictions hidden in the space activated, Butcher would need to clash with them. Butcher shouted angrily, Blind, Granny, my waist is about to break. Have you two finished resting? Blind sighed. I'm old and my bones aren't like before, let me rest a while more. I ain't much younger than you, Butcher said angrily. Furthermore, my lower body was just reattached and it's not as strong. If I have to continue fighting, my upper and lower bodies will separate for you to see. Blind said slowly, Granny is still young, let her take over. An old voice came from Granny Sai's mouth and sneered, even though I'm very strong, my wife's body can't withstand it anymore. Wife, let me take over your body. Scram. Granny Sai said angrily. Butcher and Blind's expression turned weird. Granny Sai's illness was becoming more and more severe. After she had found them and they met danger again and again, Li Tianxing frequently jumped out and took control of her body. The devil seed is becoming stronger and stronger. Old woman Sai will be replaced by Li Tianxing sooner rather than later. The changing of the space around them was like a god throwing a dice. Each side of the dice represented a divine restriction, and they were in that dice. On which side the dice landed on, the divine restriction on it would activate. However, this wasn't a 6-sided dice, but one which had 108 sides. Now they landed on the side of the stars, and the land under their feet disappeared as their surroundings transformed into a boundless starry sky. There was nothing above them and no land below them. The flashing stars were not real stars but mirrors. Suddenly, the lights from them gathered together and shone at the trio with a hum. Butcher shouted out and slashed at the terrifying divine light with every cloud has a silver lining. The divine light split into half and brushed past their bodies, destroying everything that was not immediately behind Butcher. Granny Sai immediately shouted, Deaf, Deaf, come here quickly. On the other side of the starry sky, Deaf drew with a brush and contended with the stars. Blind said, Deaf can't hear your voice. Before he could finish saying that, Deaf tried to fly over. A starlight unexpectedly hit him, and he was blown away, disappearing somewhere. Butcher, rest for a while, it's my turn. Li Tianxing's voice said from Granny Sai's mouth. Butcher immediately moved back, and Granny Sai went forward. The body circulated great educational heavenly devil scriptures and carefully looked at the changes of the space surrounding them. It was not only the three of them who were trapped in the layered space. Deaf, Old Ma, and Cripple were also trapped, but they were in different sides of the dice, which made it difficult for them to regroup. When Granny Sai came and saw Blind and the rest trapped inside, she had tried to unravel this restriction. But to her surprise, she had fallen in as well. Later, Deaf found his way here and also tried to solve this restriction but got swept in instead. This space restriction has 108 divine restrictions, but the central administration that operates these formations is not within this 108 sides. Blind stood up, and his godmind's eyes were as penetrating as a mirror as he looked in all directions. Our bodies are in the dice of a god. Old Ma and Cripple are on another side, but they still land in the same side sometimes. Deaf will also enter this plane once in a while, which means that the space restriction had operated for too long and there is already slight deviation in its mathematical calculation. He did some mental calculations, and his eyebrows suddenly rose. The god that laid down this space restriction had only calculated to the Shun-Shi decimal fraction, he didn't calculate to the smallest decimal. After this divine restriction operates for a period of time, it will crumble by itself. By then, the space restriction had changed into the volcano whose divine flames were like dragons. With thunder and lightning booming out, Granny Sai tried her best to contend against them as Li Tianxing spoke with her mouth. How much longer until this restriction crumbles by itself? Blind calculated for a moment and said, 24,000 years. Shut up, Blind. Butcher shouted out, wanting nothing more than to hack him into half with a knife. At this moment, a voice came from outside. Brat, your elders are trapped inside, there are 6 of them. In the space restriction, everyone was astonished and looked outside, but they couldn't see anything. Blind was extremely nervous as he commanded sternly, Mua, don't come in. You don't have the power to withstand the divine restrictions. Qin Mu's voice came from outside, Devil King, do you have a way to save them? This space restrictions use a secret technique of space matrix to layer 109 spaces, separating them into 108 sections. It might look like there is 108 of them, but there's actually 109. That voice then continued, however, the god that laid down this secret technique of space matrix should have taken the easy way out and not calculated all the way to the smallest possible decimal, which was why some flaws were left. This secret technique will automatically crumble after operating for 24,000 years, but if one managed to find the 109th space, it shouldn't be hard to solve this. Give me a moment to calculate. In the space restriction, Granny Sai, Butcher, and the rest looked at one another. The person beside Qin Mu Shaw is remarkable, to be able to see the marvel of this restriction with a look. He's much more reliable than Blind. After a while, that voice spoke again. Do you have some treasure you don't use? Something that's quite solid so I can throw it into the 109th space. If a solid thing entered that place, it would be something like an extra object appearing in operating gears, automatically jamming them. This formation would then be naturally solved. Qin Mu's then said, I picked this up in Roland's Golden Palace, is it useful? This treasure isn't bad. For you to pick up this kind of treasure, you sure are lucky. No wonder I couldn't trick you, your luck is heaven-defying, so it's not me that's incapable. Just as he was saying that, Granny Sai and the rest saw a luminous pearl flying in front of them. That pearl grew bigger and bigger until there seemed to be mountains and rivers within. It was as if there was a complete world in the pearl with majestic mountain ranges and never-ending waterfalls. The luminous pearl streaked across the horizon, having become an enormous object. The circular sky had mountains and rivers which disappeared the next instant. Be careful, when the restriction is unraveled, it will be a little rough, the voice outside warned. Just as he finished, violent tremors suddenly came from the depths of the space. The layers of space crumbled one after another, while the land, water, fire, and wind poured forth frantically, sweeping across everything. The power of the divine restrictions in each layer of space cracked, and terrifying energy spewed out in all directions. The people who were in the restriction immediately roused their vital chi to execute their strongest defensive methods to fight against this violent energy. Luckily for them, this energy wasn't directed at them but was simply spewing out in all directions, so they could still handle it. If it was directed at them, they would have definitely been shattered into pieces. Qin Mu stood in front of a part of the forest which had suddenly turned into ashes. The surging shockwave had swept in all directions and turned all trees into fine powder. Thud, 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 thud. Four figures appeared out of nothing and crashed heavily against the ground, creating pits beneath them. Qin Mu shook his head. So old yet can't spare people from worrying. Cripple, move away. Def's voice came from above as this elder fell upside down from the sky. Below him, Cripple gave a grunt as Def crashed onto him. In mid-air, the aura of Buddha shone brightly as a huge Buddha descended. A golden spring poured out from the ground and a lotus bloomed inside it. The huge Buddha placed his legs down and stepped onto the lotus. The lotus and golden spring vanished, and the great Buddha dispersed, turning into an elder in green. He was none other than Old Ma, and despite his clothes being slightly tattered, he was in a much better state than the rest. Everyone got up and looked at one another. They had actually survived and come out of that space. Even though they had all suffered heavy injuries, none of them were fatal. Everyone raised their heads to see Qin Mu standing in the distance. The youth of disabled elderly village kept shaking his head in disdain at them, becoming even more unreliable as they got older. In front of Qin Mu stood a proud iron lump. With his 8 arms on his waist, He was like a lantern and had a look that expected them to worship him. Behind Qin Mu was a dragon Chelin that was as fat as a pig. He looked like he still hadn't fully woke up from sleep and was sluggish, having no interest in anything. Mua, why are you here? Granny Sai was astonished and came forward to size Qin Mu up. After examining him, she grumbled, "How dare you barge into such a dangerous place? You're too gutsy. Are you hurt anywhere? Granny, stay farther away from him." Blind went up, slightly nervous as he looked at Qin Mu. Granny Sai is somewhat unable to handle the devil's seed in her Dao heart. She's sometimes male and sometimes female, and we don't know when she'll be taken over by Li Tianxing. Be careful of her laying her hands on you. An old voice came from Granny Sai's mouth which was filled with a devilish nature. Don't worry, he is the current cult master of our sacred cult. As the previous cult master, I naturally won't lay my hands on him. Suddenly, Granny Sai's voice became female again. Li Tianxing, go back. Cripple went forward and sized up Jutian Devil King who had his 8 arms on his waist. Mua, your iron lump sure is useful. What's his name again? Old Ma said, Jutian Devil King. Butcher came forward to have a look and asked suspiciously, where did you get him? The last I saw you, you didn't have this iron fellow. He's still pretty useful. So ugly, Def said. Jutian Devil King became furious and wanted to blow up, but Qin Mu swiftly interrupted, this is Jutian Devil King, the supreme ruler of Jutian world which I have invited to save all of you. He has extremely high attainments in divine restrictions so he can definitely bring us to safety. Jutian Devil King instantly became happy. This brat still knows what to say, even though his intentions are a little bad, his methods a little cruel, his heart a little too cautious. Where's village chief? Qin Mu asked. As well as Grandpa Apothecary and Grandpa Mute, did they reach this place? Blind shook his head. My eyesight is good and I saw traces of Apothecary and village chief, but I didn't see Mute. The other people nodded silently. Granny Sai said, Apothecary and village chief should have faced no problems since they are together. There's also Patriarch and Elder of Discipline with them. However, we haven't seen Mute and this fellow never says a word. Whatever he plans to do, he won't share it with us. If he's alone, I reckon he'd find it hard to hold on. Mua, this place is so dangerous yet you still had to find your way here, you've had it hard. Qin Mu instantly got angry. All of you wandered off instead of coming back home for New Year's. If you got lost, what could I do but come and find you? Devil King, you shall lead the way. And you all, stop wandering off. En. The bunch of elderly nodded in a flurry. Like and comments friends. So this video will end here.